Welcome everyone to another crafting conversation. In these series of interviews, we talk to academics and practitioners about their experiences of job crafting and what we can learn from this to make our work and ways of working better. So I'm really excited to be joined today by Angela Scott. So Angela is a business psychologist and she's the founder of the Culture Principle. And Angela is also a thought leader when it comes to hybrid working. So someone who I know is kind of really interested and experienced about actually working with organisations to make hybrid working more effective for them. And I'm really curious about exploring how job crafting can add to that. We've had a couple of conversations offline about this, and we thought it would be great to record them and share them with other people. So as a thought leader on hybrid working, she helps to build cultures and she works with organisations to help avoid hybrid failures, as you refer to them. And she's had a number of diverse leadership roles over the past 15 years. And one thing in common is that she's experienced and had experience of leading remote and hybrid divisions and teams. Angela is passionate about culture and it's being the foundation of a high performing organisation. And she deeply understands the unique challenges of this context. So with that introduction, I'm delighted to invite Angela in terms of what will probably be a free-flowing conversation about hybrid working and particularly around the interlink to job crafting. So, and before I can ask you your first question, how was that for an introduction? Have I missed anything that we should?
No, that was very good. Thank you, Rob. I think the thing to stress here as well is that I'm a business psychologist, but I have a day job as well. So I'm still leading teams. So I'm out there doing that job as well. So every single day is a learning experience still for me as a leader as well. And I learn a lot from the people that I coach as well. So it's a really unique position to be in, actually.
Yeah, absolutely. So again, you're learning, you're kind of developing your skills and knowledge all the time. And I think that's the benefit from having conversations like this, working with teams, enjoying that experience. Brilliant, thank you. So let's start, as we often do with this, is to talk about job crafting. This is around crafting conversations. When did you first come across job crafting and what made you intrigued by the concept?
So I think I've always been aware that this is a thing. I just wasn't aware of the name job crafting because I've always been someone who's been kind of very in charge of my own career and always looking for opportunities to develop and grow. But I don't think I appreciated the meaning and purpose aspect of job crafting until I got a little bit older. I first heard the term when I was doing my MSc in organisational psychology. First of all, in the motivation module, then it came up in the well-being module, and that's when we really started to dig into the context of job crafting. Yeah, so that's really where I first came across it.
You first came across it in terms of your studies, and interestingly, it popped up in different areas. And one of the things that we find in terms of job crafting is it can support different agendas. So it can support hybrid working, maybe in terms of what we talk about today, but also well-being and also motivation and engagement as well. So that's really really interesting. And so talking about that, about virtual and hybrid. What do you think, what value do you think job crafting has to offer people who are trying to make virtual and hybrid working work for them? Is this something you think you recommend people being aware of or using? And what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, definitely. I'm a big fan of job crafting, and I think the thing to remember here is, and this is what I think made me really interested in it, is if you think about well-being at work in general, first of all. If you think about it like medicine, right. I know that sounds weird.
Yeah, I like it.
But actually, if you approach this in the same way, job crafting is actually addressing issues at source. That's like primary intervention, if you like. Everything else is either coping or support. So if you think about things at work, like employee assist or getting someone a coach, those are all secondary or tertiary interventions. And the real power of job crafting for me is it's that primary level intervention. And so it's important in any team. So that's the important thing to say. It's important for anyone. But I think why it's so important in a hybrid or a remote organisation is that you are very detached from that kind of mothership.
Yes.
Whatever size your organisation is. And so enabling people to feel empowered and have autonomy and have, that ability to have a say in what they do day to day, how they do it, not necessarily what they need to deliver, because that's usually you're usually told that, right? but having that power of how to do something and be able to bring in new elements, new creative ways of doing things, I think it's really powerful to feel that connection with the company that you're working for, even if you're not going to be seeing the people that you work with at all. I mean, I work in a team at the moment where I've only met one person face to face, actually. And I think a lot of people are still in that situation.
Yeah.
So I think job crafting is a really powerful tool to help you feel that connection with the company, but also with the others that you're working with, and with your own kind of personal meaning that you want to bring into the role that you're doing.
Yeah, nice. So in terms of the different ways that people can job craft, so they can look at their tasks, they can look at their relationships, and they can look at their purpose. So one of the ways that I'd really love to pick your brains on this, as someone who can spend a lot more time thinking about it than I do in terms of a hybrid perspective. But one of the things that I think job crafting has to offer is around getting people to explore kind of the kind of when and the where people work, in terms of making sure that works for individuals, as well as the kind of why. So you've talked about the meaning and purpose. So that's kind of getting people to think about and change and experiment maybe with those different elements in terms of the hours they work, or kind of the locations they work on, from and optimizing their environment. Does that kind of resonate with you? Would you say that makes sense, or would you kind of add to that in any way?
Yeah, so it does make sense, and I think the thing I would add here as well is it goes a little bit further in terms of what I was saying in terms of how you do your job, right? When you do your job, where you do your job, that's all in the how for me, really.
Oh, I see. So that would be with
because so I think, for example, we still have this, and I think this is a really important point in terms of job crafting. We still have this view that everyone needs to be together to brainstorm or think of ideas. Yeah. So, we've got this old traditional view that you get people together for a couple of days and you do a bit of brainstorming. Now, as you probably know, and as you're, the people watching this probably have experienced, if you try to do that on Zoom or Teams, it's a disaster because people just get tired too quickly and they don't engage. So part of this job crafting thing is like thinking up new ways to be creative. Like, how do you generate ideas personally and how do you bring them to the group? So I think that's a piece of job crafting that we maybe didn't appreciate before as much as we probably need to now, because that's really important, is how do you kind of synchronize those ideas when you had your time on your own and then you bring them together, because you do it in a very different way than we were used to doing when we have more face-to-face time. And I think that brings in a lot of opportunities for crafting your role in a different way. Yeah,
I love that. That idea of ideation, I think, in terms of and saying, approaching things differently, or doing existing tasks in new ways. And again, I know that you've been working remotely and with hybrid teams for a long time. You're ahead of the curve, as it were, Angela. I think that. But I think a lot of people are still I think a year out from a lot of organisations that I work with, at least, where people have worked much more at home or in different locations, trying to find a way of doing tasks and activities that work for them in terms of but they're still, I suppose, trying to translate kind of how they did it in person to doing it offline. And again, maybe it'll work in some instances, but sometimes they need to do it different, as you were saying, completely differently.
Yeah, it's almost as if you kind of need to put your original ways of working to one side a little bit. Because they don't, I think what I've seen people doing, and a lot of the people I've been coaching have been struggling with, well, I'm this kind of leader and therefore I need to just do it on video. And I'm like, well, no, it doesn't work like that. Yeah. You're going to have to change the way you do things. That also means encouraging your team to craft the way that they work as well. Yes. I'll give you an example. Someone I was working with has a team of people that do business development. And they were used to being in an office together and having that kind of camaraderie where they'd say, well, I did this outreach and, I didn't hear from anyone today. They were all miserable. And they'd go out after work and have a drink and all that kind of stuff. And they were trying to do exactly the same kind of thing remotely. Now, can you imagine if all these people are like stuck in their houses on their own? So suddenly that their job feels very boxed in, doesn't feel like they have much autonomy, purely because they've lost that camaraderie that they used to have. So what I've been encouraging that leader to do is actually change the way that they see their roles, get them to say, actually, we don't need to spend as much time doing that. We could do our job differently. We could go to more events. Yeah. We could outreach to people in a different way. And that's what they've actually been doing, actually changing the way that they do their jobs. And so if you think back to the original ideas around, job crafting in factories, that's exactly the same thing, but in a knowledge workers environment.
Yeah,
and I think sometimes people are just not aware of that.
I think, as you were saying at the start, the kind of bring that back to the start of the conversation, you're saying you're aware of this as a thing, you've been doing it, kind of, but not deliberately, if that makes sense. And I think some people
wasn't aware.
Yeah, exactly. So not doing it, not deliberately job crafting. So again, you're ahead of the curve here, again, Angela, in that respect. But that kind of conversation you have with that leader as well, is giving them permission and encouragement to actually just saying, look, just think about what you're trying to achieve here, or think about how you can do that in different ways, and to break free of that kind of our existing narratives or constructs that we've got. And again, it reminds me of the conversations I had with some people early on in terms of the pandemic, and was around actually someone who works in sales, and say the way that I generate sales and leads is by having face-to-face conversations. And I can't have the narrative they had was that I can't have those face-to-face conversations, and therefore I'm not going to get any sales, because that was what they felt they were good at. They told themselves this, and they probably were very good at that kind of ability to make kind of connection in the moment, with a person over a coffee or a drink or something. And then they're having to reframe those kind of conversations. And I imagine, do you see this a lot of people are having to do this a lot, of having to kind of almost, when they move into hybrid and virtual working, they're having to kind of reconsider those stories that they're telling themselves.
Yeah, and what's really interesting, obviously, because we're almost 2 years into this now. And so as you said, for me, the change wasn't as different because I was used to working in a hybrid way, but I was used to being face-to-face occasionally. Yeah. I think the biggest shock has been for people who have had to go completely remote, where they were completely face-to-face, and now are faced with this kind of no man's land of not really knowing how this is going to be carried forward. Yeah. But I argue with people, well, this is an opportunity. Yeah. It's actually an opportunity to design the way that you want to work in future. Don't wait for someone else to come along and tell you. Yeah. Design that future for yourself. So I think when you start looking out there, and you'll see examples of this, if you look in places like LinkedIn, you'll see that people are doing really cool things, like in terms of working with their customers. Yeah, they obviously meet them face to face now where they can, but there are still really great examples of workshops that are being done, conversations that are happening, not necessarily needing to have a face to face meeting. Yeah. So I think for some people this is incredibly powerful, because it means that they can now do jobs that they probably ruled out in the past. Jobs that would have required them to do a lot of travel, where it didn't suit their lifestyle, they can now do because they're able to craft it in a way that suits them. I can actually say, well, I'll do a little bit of travel when we can again. Yeah. But actually, that's not the thing that's most important in this role. The most important thing is, well, how do I build those connections? And it doesn't need to be face to face, which is a whole new way of looking at the role that they previously may have not wanted to do.
I love that. To kind of use this as an opportunity, use this as bring more weight, rather than waiting for people to tell you how to do this. Use this as the opportunity to do that for yourself, and giving people the encouragement and the permission to do that. And feeding onto that. So the next kind of question I was going to ask you is around, how do you get that permission? So how do we encourage managers to encourage their teams, the people that they manage, to personalise their roles? So I sometimes find there's some restriction, there's some worry about this. So I was just wondering, what's your kind of thoughts on that? Do you see that as an issue or not in terms of space? And then secondly, what advice would you give to people maybe who's got a manager and who is a manager and they want to kind of are worried about this?
Okay, so is it an issue? First of all, yes or no? It can be. Yes. And I think it really depends, as is the answer to everything. If you're asking a good academic, that's the answer to everything. But particularly related to this, I think it brings in this issue with hybrid working, which is this autonomy or not, micromanagement. Yeah. So what's your leadership style if you're a leader, and what is the style of the person leading you? Because I think it makes it incredibly difficult to create a culture where job crafting is accepted if you've got a culture of micromanagement and a culture of fear. Because then it becomes, well, I'm just going to execute and do what I'm told to, and I'm not going to stick my neck out, because you haven't got psychological safety in that kind of environment. Yeah. People don't speak up. People don't go above and beyond. I mean, that's in a very extreme case if you think about on the spectrum. Right on the other side, if you think about a culture where it's very transparent, it's very autonomous. So people, they're told what the outcomes are that they should deliver, but they're left, very much down to them as to how they're going to do that. Yeah. It's a lot easier in that kind of environment to encourage people to job craft.
Yes.
Having said that, I think in answer to your second part of the question, I think you can still be a manager and encourage job crafting, even if you're in that first culture that I've described. Because it's more difficult because you don't have the support around you, but you can certainly support your own team to do that by, this is for me about encouraging that autonomy in your own team, being very clear on what you've got to deliver, but not telling everyone every day exactly what they should be doing and checking up on them every 5 minutes. It's really counterintuitive, actually, but you have to micromanage even less to be a good leader in a hybrid or remote team than you do in a co-located team. It's counterintuitive for a lot of people. A lot of people still can't get their heads around that. But the more you can be hands off, but support and challenge people, you're obviously there for you're not detached. But the more you can be hands off and let people do what they need to do in their own way, I believe the better performance that you can expect from the team. I've been digging around for evidence of this, and there are a few good reports on this available in a few journals, but it hasn't been investigated enough yet, I think, in relation to hybrid and remote, just because we haven't been in this that's a worldwide phenomenon long enough. But I can tell you from my own experience that this has very much been the case in the teams that I work in, very focused on outcomes. So when I'm coaching people to do this, I'm sharing my experience and saying, well, what are the goals that you're setting? First of all, and how much autonomy you're giving. And some people find this really confusing, like goals, autonomy. Well, surely, we should be just drilling away at the goals every week and getting into the detail and micromanaging. I said, no, they know what they're supposed to do. You give them direction and they head in the right direction. If you see the ship going off course, that's what's harder as a leader, because sometimes you see, if you're not paying attention and you see it too late. So I think to encourage other managers to do this is really just to instill in them that there is so much evidence that if you allow people more autonomy and more freedom, that they will perform better. Yes. They'd be crazy not to do it. I mean, there is evidence of that.
That makes complete sense. And I think for me, around that idea as a leader, as a hybrid, going into this idea of saying tolerate as much autonomy as you possibly can, your kind of viewing from the natural inclination might be saying micromanagement, that's going to help people. But actually it's the opposite. And sometimes when we do work, it feels counterintuitive to us as against our kind of better judgments, but actually saying create that space. But we're really clear, if I'm understanding correctly, Angela, about being what the goals, what the outcomes and the time frames you're asking people to operate within. So they're very clear on that. So you're not setting people up to do woolly tasks or ambiguous tasks where they don't know, but make sure they're really clear and then just get out of their way. And that also, imagine, will create that opportunity for people to think about doing those tasks differently as well, rather than saying you have to do this to get to that outcome. They might better find a shortcut or a better way of doing it.
Yeah, and I think communication is really key in this. So communicating enough is obviously important, but the most important thing is consistency, as with everything in life, right?
Yeah.
But your actions and your words have to match, and again, I believe that's important for any leader of any kind of organisation, but even more important if you're leading a remote or hybrid organisation, because people are seeing you on a much more limited basis. They don't see you wander past their desk. They don't see you eating your lunch, whatever. So they're making assumptions about you based on a very limited set of personal interactions. So communication of those goals, of the expectations, of the outcomes that you expect to see, and ensuring that's consistent is absolutely crucial in a hybrid team.
Yeah, that makes complete sense. That makes complete sense. And just following up on that in a question, I suppose, in terms of how have you got? Again, one of the things you've offered to people is around coaching. So again, people kind of help people to explore how they can do it effectively. Would you have any tips for people from looking at maybe relationship crafting who used to kind of get their connection by face-to-face conversations with people without check-ins, and they can't do that now. Have you got a recommendation for people about something they could try if they were trying to still kind of foster that informal connection, but doing it in a virtual way?
Yeah. So there's a couple of things. I think if you're a leader of a team or teams or an organisation, that's one of the things that actually you have to do for your team members is connect those dots. So being well connected, again, is very important for you as a leader. So, I have weeks where I say, well, I have a conversation on Monday with that person, and then I had a conversation on Wednesday. I'm going to connect those two people together.
Yeah, nice.
But obviously it doesn't help me personally.
Yeah.
So for me personally, what I actually do to try and fill in some of those serendipitous interactions that are missing is, in a given week, I will have probably 5 or 6 conversations that have nothing really to do with my day job, or they're on the periphery of my day job. But I know that person is doing something interesting that might be relevant to my team sometime in the future, or it might be relevant to me in sometime in the future, or actually they're just really interesting and I saw them on a group call and I pinged them a message and said, can we have a virtual coffee? So I think it doesn't need to be overdone. But if you think about the amount of interactions like that you might have in a week, you might, if you were in an office, you might have maybe 3 or 4. Yeah. And I'm just trying to basically recreate that for myself.
Yeah.
And I've never had one person go, oh no, I haven't got time for a 20-minute chat.
Yeah.
People don't do that. And actually, if they do, you probably don't want to spend time with them anyway.
No, that's really fascinating. And it's really, and I'm doing some work with an organisation at the moment, and one of the things that we're talking about is the things they really value as a team, and something that keeps coming up in terms of the things they really value in terms of they want to keep doing is having the informal chit chat or the opportunity to connect with people. And they're saying when we get too busy, we just focus on transactional mode, and we kind of miss that informal stuff, which is actually I suppose it's the magic stuff that keeps people connected. Is the way they're joining the dots, as you were saying, or feeling part of the team. And so I love the approach that you have just given there about.
I think the other thing that's important as well is don't have too many meetings. Don't attend too many meetings. And the reason I say that is, again, what I've heard happening is, and I've seen it happening in my own organisation, people are putting in meetings about a meeting, and it's crazy. And we're all sitting there thinking, well, how is that going to work when we travel and go back to the office again? Because we don't have any time. We don't have any time to do any real work. So what's happening is there isn't space to do any job crafting because people are putting in too many meetings. So I'm actually encouraging everyone to not go to certain meetings. I put in all my team's meetings now as optional. Nice. If again, you know what you're supposed to deliver. If you feel that coming to this meeting is not going to help you deliver, then you don't come. Yeah. I make sure that everything is also communicated in another way. If it's something they need to know, if it's something they need to take action on, it's in written form as well. So I think it's very important that space is created for job crafting in this environment, because I see that being squeezed out. And really, in my view, you should have. It's a bit like meditation, I guess. When I think it was the Dalai Lama that said you should meditate twice as much if you're really busy and stressed.
Yes, yeah, something like that. Again,
so, ideally, we should have 2 days a week out of the 5 to think and job craft. I think.
I love that idea. I love that space, that ability to reflect and to experiment and to think about how you can do your job. And ultimately, again, it's this comes back to the counterintuitive bit. The thing that you say to yourself is the more people work on their kind of day-to-day work, the more output they'll have because they're just working harder at it. Yet again, if you create space to do it smarter with greater energy in the way that you've just suggested, to give people that balance, that freedom to craft or to do things better, then ultimately the outcomes will be higher. But again, it's against the natural flow of what people have experienced in the past, I suppose, for leaders, and that's maybe why they don't do it.
I think we've forgotten all the research that's been done on job crafting. If you go back and look at it, right?
Well, because I would say not even seen it. I think it probably answers the problem. That's why I love talking.
Okay, so a lot of the original work. So I definitely recommend Amy Rezniewski
Yeah.
as someone to follow. I'm sure you're aware of her. But I think her work's really interesting, as she's been one of the people that's kind of helped translate job crafting from its original roots in industry, manufacturing. And I always think back to these examples of, factories where they thought, work harder, work harder, work harder. And it doesn't produce more results, funnily enough.
No.
So why should we expect this to happen? Why would this work in a knowledge environment? It's not any different.
That's really fascinating. And again, the thing that I find interesting from this, saying it won't work in this environment, or the job crafting can only work in this environment because I haven't got the space, the freedom yet. The first, as you're saying, the first study on job crafting, the first studies were in cleaners, like in terms of for people that we think would have no free. So we're going to apply to everyone. So we've had this kind of conversation about lots of tips and hints within this, and it's been amazing, Andrew, so thank you. And the question I wanted to kind of was always curious about myself is around actually how do you apply this in practice? So you've given some examples maybe about serendipity in terms of creating those opportunities as a manager. But are there other ways that you craft your job? How do you kind of bring this to life within your own work?
Yeah, so I think I'm very clear on what my career goals are and what my interests are, and what drives me. I think it's more difficult when you haven't done that piece of work. And I also know I'm very clear on what my personal values are. So I tend to go after things based on how that will add meaning to my role. So for example, I'll get involved in extracurricular things, diversity and inclusion things like that, because I know that will help support my personal career goals and personal goals outside of work as well, actually. So I think being able to identify what interests you, what you're good at, is really important. And the reason I say that is because that is incredibly difficult for a lot of people. I do a fair bit of just career coaching as well, actually. And I start the conversation by going, what did you enjoy the most this week? and some people can't answer that question. Yeah. It's incredibly hard to answer those kind of questions for yourself. It sounds ridiculous, but you could probably have that conversation with your spouse or your close friend, or even a colleague, or one of your, the people that you work with in your wider team. But those questions are quite difficult to ask of yourself. So it does take a little while to get to that for some people. Because if you don't know the answer to that, it's very difficult, I think, to craft your job, because you can craft it in a direction that actually makes your job worse for you if you don't know the answers to those questions. Yeah,
that's right. And I always go the way that I love that in terms of, for me, when I talk about job crafting, it's around creating a better fit for you as an individual. So but you need to know what your fit is, your dimensions. And I love the questions you asked there about what do you enjoy, what are you kind of maybe good at, and what are your values, and can you kind of craft in a way that leans into those rather than ignores them, if that makes sense. So if you're going to personalize or shape your job or experiment doing things differently in all the ways you've said, do it in a way that's kind of going to ring true to you as an individual, and rather than not. And that, again, it makes complete sense, but it's maybe something that people don't always think about. So
yeah, and I think particularly for those people that work in large organisations, it's very easy to just kind of go along with things and think, well, I might see a job advertised that sounds interesting and I'll apply for it. But that isn't taking charge of your situation and job crafting. It's not really taking charge of your career. Yeah, that's just leaving things to chance, in my view. And so, I'd encourage anyone to do. It's a difficult piece of work and it takes time, but I think. And it's an ongoing piece of work, right? Because you change. People aren't static. There are certain traits that I think are static, but you do change as things evolve and as your environment evolves. But if you've got kind of a baseline of understanding of what drives you, it's really, really helpful to make the right decisions around job crafting and get involved in the right projects. And what it will also avoid you doing is, I'm sure that you've experienced this at some point, Rob. You'll get a project from someone and they think you should be really excited about it. And you just feel a bit flat. Yeah. Like, do I have to do this? And it's not aligned to what drives you and what you're interested in. But it's very interesting for the person that's given it to you. But if you don't know what drives you, you're left there going, well, I should really be motivated by this, but I'm just not.
Yeah.
So I think that's really important, that piece of work.
And having a manager then that also gets you, though, and gets you and knows that. So then they actually said, Angela, I think you will like this piece of work. And you do. And it's like, my manager gets me, they see me. It's so powerful. It's so amazing, isn't it? To kind of actually say they get me,
Yes.
they believe in me as an individual. And yet it can fall flat if they say, I think you're going to enjoy this, Angela. You're like, no, like you don't know me. Like, so that can have the.
Yeah. So again, this is really, really important in a hybrid or remote team, because, you know, the limited interactions, you might not have met the people. You have to treat everyone as an individual if you're leading a team. But it isn't kind of coming along going, right, we're going to do this thing. You should be really excited about it, because if you don't know the individuals, you know, it's going to fall flat.
Yeah.
And again, it's hard at work, right? So if you've got, you know, a number of people reporting to you, it takes time you've got to invest.
It does, but it's worth it though, ultimately, in terms of that. And again, the starting point can be really simple about understanding what other things, because a checkpoint as a manager, do you know what the projects that excite and kind of turn on or kind of like energize some of your colleagues, and what are the things that don't, and have that kind of conversation. And I think there's so much value to this. Oh, Angela, this has been amazing. And it's just talking to you, giving me some ideas as well, and some really practical things that you've shared. So thank you so much for that. If people wanted to connect with you after this, kind of watching this video or listening to it, what's the best way of them kind of connecting with you?
Well, you can go to the cultureprinciple.com. So that's the website for my company. I'm also on LinkedIn, Angela Scott. So if you want to follow me on LinkedIn, please feel welcome to do so. I do post kind of regular things on a variety of topics, but lots of them are obviously to do with hybrid leadership. But yeah, I'm very, very keen on job crafting. And I think it's, as I said, going back to the beginning, it is addressing, you know, issues with work at the cause, not trying to address the consequences, which I think is why it's really, really powerful and needs to be intertwined in any kind of career management or, you know, engagement improvement that you look at. I think job crafting is absolutely key in any of that.
Thank you, Angela. We share that kind of sense, and I do recommend, as I say to anyone here, I do recommend kind of links here in your posts and blogs. I think that's how we connected in the first
Yes.
one of these serendipitous kind of conversations that we had. So we're kind of in practice. Thank you so much for your time, and please do connect with Angela if you want to learn more about what she does. And I'd like to thank everyone today for tuning in and watching this. And if you found it useful, or if you've got any further questions, then please connect with us at Tailored Thinking. So thanks so much for your time, everyone. And thank you, Angela. And I wish you a wonderful day.